When you look at the situation right now in Ukraine and the way that the United States somehow, that the national security strategy of the United States under the Trump administration has decided somehow to leave the burden of the Ukraine war on the shoulders of Europeans. And how do you see the situation, the dynamic that is going on within the Western, into, let's put it this way, considering the policies that the United States has in Ukraine and the reactions they're getting from Europeans?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me again, Nima, and thank you for that warm introduction. Um, uh, yes, so administrations, U.S. administrations do this. They release. This is a sort of a political culture in the U.S. That they release national security strategy papers. I think it's once in every administration, in each term, if I'm not mistaken. I was reading this actually a few days ago. All I can say is that I think it's heavily tilted. It's a huge departure from the past national security strategy visions, so to speak, and it's characterized by it's heavily tilted towards more pragmatic, transactional, sort of realpolitik, to put it very mildly. I cannot recall the exact quotes here. Perhaps I should have gotten some quotes out of that document. But the gist the gist of the document is that basically Europe has to take care of itself, the United States is no longer interested, strategically speaking, in babysitting Europe. I've said this many times before, and of course, great scholars and colleagues have said this, that the era of the United States or Europe generating this fear that the great Soviet Union, with its communist ideology, was going to dominate Western Europe, Eastern Europe. Well, it did, but then just sort of go, basically monopolize the continent, the old continent, and cause all kinds of strategic challenges to the United States. I think that era is over. We know that it's over, and part of the problem, part of the reason that what we are seeing today, I would argue, vis-a-vis Ukraine, Russia, and elsewhere, is this sort of process of figuring out what to do in the post-Cold War era, what to do with Europe. And I think if you are smart, you look at these things cleverly, you realize that Russia poses no national security threat to the United States and to the collective West, unless, of course, you build up sort of hysteria, as it has been sort of customary in the West, against Russia, based on their visceral hatred of Russia, of course, and you sort of restart this whole mythology that Russia is about to invade, dominate the European continent militarily and pose sort of existential threat to. I mean, it's laughable for me to even. I mean, I say these things and it makes me feel sort of how simplistic and how absurd this is, and yet we have to talk about this in the peacetime, right? In the post-Cold War era, we still have to talk about this, and so that's my view on what this document says. There are other things also, I just can't recall right now, but China, of course, we cannot forget, China, of course, is a big challenge for this administration as well. And they view it as the rising power, and the potential regional hegemon. And based off of that strategy. The document sort of reflects that strategy, of course, and that raises even more questions. Well, then, if China, as we all know, is going, if it continues to rise and develop economically, although some say now that it's sort of plateaued, but being that, putting that aside, that hypothesis for a second, let's just look at China as the rising power and the potential regional hegemon. Why are we fighting with Russia? What is this? Why? Why are we wasting resources? Why did we sacrifice Ukraine? This potentially one of the wealthiest countries in Europe that could have been, if the collective West had any, I would say, sort of a shred of moral ethic and ethical sort of compass, they would have built up Ukraine. They would have turned it into some sort of very developed modern state. And yet, look at Ukraine now. So the question is, the question becomes, are we driving China? Are we driving Russia into China's arms by acting this way vis-a-vis Ukraine? And of course we are. Putin's trip to China recently, and then his few days ago, he just came back, I think, he was obviously there in India. He met with Modi. This shows that the entire sort of Eurasian condominium, it's sort of pulling geopolitics towards that side of the globe. And these pulling forces of geopolitics have been emboldened and, have been caused and put into action by foolish United States policy of neoliberal and neoconservative sort of messianic worldview. And today we're staring at the result, at this disastrous result of what caused and provoked, and people to this day think that the word provoked is a controversial word, and I don't believe that at all. This was a provoked war. Russia and Putin went out of their way, Putin's apparatus and sort of Russian strategic thinkers, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, to become close with the West. And they really spit in Russia's face, let's be honest here. And they mistreated Russia. And they really gave Russia a lip service with all the democracy promotion and NGOs and shock therapies of the early 90s. And they were really toying with Russia. While a lot of serious people in the early 90s, including George Kennan, of course, not to mention Kissinger and everyone else, were saying that this was going to explode in our faces. The chickens would come home to roost eventually, and we are facing that. Of course, Mearsheimer predicted this also, and now we are witnessing that hubris, the results of that hubris. While I truly believe that all of it could have been avoided. So to answer your question, just to finalize, yes, the document is very much tilted towards trying to avoid everything I just said, meaning for the United States to sort of come home and calm down and look at its own problems domestically, America first, right? And to figure out a way to perhaps prioritize and compartmentalize strategically vital national security issues of the United States. Just look at the globe, look at the map, and pick and choose, but do not go there with sort of a symmetric approach where everywhere, every corner of the world has to come under the sway of liberal internationalism or democracy promotion and all that. So that's the gist of the document, in my view.
How does the United States see Russia today? We know that the war in Ukraine is coming to an end, and sooner or later they're gonna come up with a settlement, with an agreement in Ukraine. But you mentioned how the United States sees China. What is the role of Russia in the mind of those people who are writing these documents? National security strategy, we had during the Biden administration the same policy. They were mentioning that China is, the ultimate competitor to the United States. How do they want Russia? What is the role of Russia in their mind? Do they really believe that they can separate Russia from China, or they are reconsidering that sort of strategy? Because right now, I don't see Russia being, they're going to be able to separate Russia from China because things have changed
Yes.
drastically. Your
Yes.
take on that?
Yeah, this is courtesy of, the whole neocon establishment. This is the courtesy of, you know, ideological fanaticism. This is the visceral. All this is based on visceral hatred of Russia. We can go into sort of cultural aspects of it as well, as Slavs being, sort of backward peoples, or not Western, or and yet look at Russia with enormous culture, literature, enormous potential. Yes, of course, Russia has always had problems domestically, economically. And, corruption has always been the problem. Russian elite betrayal has always weakened Russia. But nevertheless, look, the international system sort of goes through epochs of change, right? So let's just say from 20 to 4 years. First World War, Second World War, and then you have Cold War. But these things come and go. But for some reason, the United States and ideologues and sort of that eventually sort of tag the Western Europe and the collective Europe along with them, just fail to understand how to prioritize the vision, strategic vision, or recognize when a certain state is a threat and when it's not. And we all know that this sort of takes us back to the whole American exceptionalism concept, which is fine. Every great nation, every great country, state, every superpower has had that sort of myth creation, right? That they feed themselves with. This is understandable. But there's one thing to think of America as being exceptional, which, in my view, in many respects, it is. It's a young country that has accomplished colossal things. Let's just be honest here. There's been enormous things, but it has also made foolish mistakes to the detriment of everyone else, really. And to itself, first and foremost. There was this adage that the United States can go along and keep making mistakes, but because of its geopolitical location on the Western Hemisphere, surrounded by two oceans, and being the richest, wealthiest, most powerful country in the world, it shouldn't care to continue to be making these mistakes. And yet, no, it should care. And guess what? I think Trump realizes this. A lot of people have said that right now. The instinct that everybody talks about, Trump's instinct. President Trump knows when he came to power, when he became president, he understood that this madness had to be stopped. We can dissect his true intentions or his sort of inner thoughts and say, it was coming from the pure heart, that he didn't want any more wars. However you want to look at it, the fact is the man is a pragmatist. He understands he understands that the past 30 years of U.S. foreign policy has brought nothing but disasters for America. And that's why he became president. He understood that perfectly well. And he called on neoliberal and the bluff of the neocon neoliberal establishment. It's a fact. Now what we are seeing is, to a large extent, he's being sort of swayed again by the system, because the system never disappeared. Presidents come and go, the system states, the deep state, that intention that carries sort of deep intention of how they see the United States role in the world. That intention is still there. So I think Trump must be given credit, considering the difficulties that he's facing. But at the same time, I think he could be, for example, with Russia, he wants deeply to stop this foolish war, this nonsense. This is insanity. I think the negotiations that are taking place, as futile as they are, the 28th point plan, and he understands that with Witkoff's visit in seeing Putin, and with Trump's son-in-law Kushner being there with him. All this is theater, of course. We understand that. Anybody who looks at these things on a deeper level understands that this is just theater, but it's a necessary theater, and it's also meaningful in many respects, because here is the American administration trying to figure this out. I don't think they will figure this out the way they're going about it, because Putin has his fundamental demands: no NATO, Eastern Ukraine has to be given up, territorial concessions must take place, and then on the lower chain, you have the whole ethnic Russian protection of Russian ethnicities there, ethnic groups there. But main fundamental points here are, giving up of the eastern, the Donbass region with all the 4 oblasts, as well as, of course, no NATO. And they just cannot seem to come up with a solution, because that's the fundamental. If you want a solution, that you have to meet those demands, period. But nevertheless, to answer your question, Trump does not view Russia as with that visceral hatred, nowhere near. If it were up to Trump, let me just simplify. If it were up to Trump, this would not have happened. This would have somehow been prevented. If Trump had been if Trump had years ago perhaps bitten, the Obamas and the Bidens of the world and the Bushes of the world, and perhaps this would not, I believe this would not have happened. Because that whole wave of neoconservatism under the Bush family and the Bush the presidency also went over Georgia first and foremost, right? Georgia was the first country that experienced the ire of this neocon craziness. Had there been Trump, back then, there's a good chance that all of that could have been prevented. And Ukraine, we would not be looking at Ukraine the way we're looking at it now. So no, Trump administration doesn't have any hatred, particularly against Russia. It's the system, it's the deep state. First of all, everyone says, deep state is a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy. Deep state is part of and parcel of any state, basically. Just the question is how powerful that deep state is, and America's deep state is extremely powerful. And so Trump really is fighting against that. But he does not share that sort of visceral hatred of Russia, I don't believe, with his colleagues in Washington, so to speak.